just to set the tone, what we are talking about when we are talking about gender equality is real high politics. In order to open our seminar, we have been fortunate enough to have the Norwegian Minister of Environment, Bård Vegar Solhjell. He's just come down from 2-3 days up in the Amazon forest to have a look at what Norway and Brazil are doing together in order to save parts of the Amazonian forest. He has been Minister also of Education. He has 3 children. He has just written a very interesting book on why politicians should be more ambitious on the big things in life. So, Bård Vegar, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. And first, let me, on behalf of the Norwegian presidency of the Nordic Council of Ministers, welcome you all to this seminar, Gender Equality is Sustainability. Because gender equality is sustainability. It's a core issue in fighting poverty, supporting sustainable development, and saving the climate. As is stated in the UN Secretary General's high-level panel on global sustainability report from January, any serious shift towards sustainable development requires gender equality. Half of humankind's collective intelligence and capacity is a resource we must nurture and develop for the sake of the multiple generations to come. The next incremental of global growth could well come from the full economic empowerment of women. Like Andrew said, I have just arrived Sunday night from a trip to the Amazon region, a region I actually have visited before. I spent 10 days in the Amazon, in the rainforest, in 2002. And it's extremely interesting to be there, also in this perspective. I have witnessed and learned how our efforts, Norwegian efforts through Red+, but of course more importantly, the Brazilian effort to preserve rainforests actually work. And this is a very impressive global effort. The Brazilian reduction in deforestation since 2004 is probably the biggest and most efficient climate change or emission-reducing effort internationally. It amounts to 10 to 15% of all Norwegian CO2 emissions, just to give you a scope of what is happening there. And it's important for development and for biodiversity. One of the programs that we are supporting is the Bolsa Floresta program in the state of Amazon. It's a forest preservation program. Families are provided with an alternative livelihood. They receive a small payment of around 50 reais, not to cut the trees down, but rather to be keepers of the forests. This sum is not awarded to just anybody. It is awarded to the women of each family household. Why? Because it's proven that women take much better care of family income than men. In an OECD report that was presented recently, it shows that women in developing countries who are employed channel 90% of their income back to the family, and by that improve access to health and education, and eventually pulls families out of poverty. Men who hold jobs, on the other hand, only channel between 30 and 40% of their income back to their families. And I have to add that this is a report. It's not about my family, just to assure you. It's a report about the general picture in developing countries. I'll give you 2 more reasons that illustrate why it is important for a society to implement policies that ensures gender equality. Firstly, the economy. It's pretty obvious, isn't it, that if women are kept out of the workforce, society will lose much of its productive capacity. In Norway, people often say that Norway has become a rich country because of oil. I usually say that no, that's not entirely correct. Norway has become a rich country because of our women. And this is, it's serious. I see that you're smiling. It's serious. Because if you look at the Norwegian rise in female labor participation from the beginning of the 70s, when we discovered oil and started to drill in the North Sea, our rise in female labor participation accounts for more of our rise in wealth than the income from the oil. So it's an extremely rich part of what can make countries wealthier. Female labor participation is important for that, for any country. It's not mostly a cultural thing. It's mostly about politics. It's about education. It's about access to kindergartens. It's about maternity leave and other measures that my colleagues in the department, in the ministries of equality and families and the ministries of education and other ministries have provided through the years. Secondly, environmental reasons. Approximately 70% of the world's farmers are women. These women play an essential role in the management of natural resources, including soil, water, forests, and energy. It is often left to them to make sure that the family is fed. Knowledge passed on from one generation to another has proved that women play a much stronger role than men in the management of ecosystem services and food security, like I mentioned an example from the Amazon region. And not to forget the impacts of climate change. A changing climate leaves women more vulnerable than men in many ways. I read about heard about an interesting example from the tsunami. When the tsunami in 2004 hit Sri Lanka, more women and girls than men and boys drowned. The simple fact was cultural. More men and boys had learned how to climb trees. Women and girls had not. When floods of extreme weather strikes, women are more likely to be the ones left behind in villages because they are the ones left to care for the sick, the elderly, and the children. I believe members of the panel and further speakers here will all provide us with more insights on these issues. Again, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Bård Vegar, for those encouraging words. Let me, before we go further into the program, present you my fellow co-moderator, Kira Appel. She's from the Danish Ministry of Gender Equality, and she is also the representative of the Danish EU presidency. And Kira, what expectations do you have for our little seminar this morning?
Well, first of all, we're not that many people, so I really wish us to participate, to have a dialogue, for everybody to contribute today. So please don't refrain from raising your hands or interfering or speaking up your mind, because we're here today to develop and concretize what we are actually feeling about gender equality and sustainability. So that's really, really important. I mean, the issue is that gender equality is a very broad and not very concrete theme. It comprises everything in the world. So does sustainable development. So we're dealing with two issues here that can be interpreted in all sorts of ways. So let's try and be very concrete. Let's try and pinpoint what we feel here today is the most important things that we want to bring back, and bring back to everybody, to our national governments, to NGOs, and whoever might be interested. Let's pinpoint what is important and distribute our messages. It's also being, as you see, filmed, and we're trying to distribute it worldwide. So let's be very cheerful and hopeful. Yeah.
And I know that you also have some technological new things that you want to introduce to us.
Exactly. You're sitting, hopefully, not on something. Hopefully you've taken this up. In order to ensure this interactivity and dialogue, we have this so-called power vote system. And it's not that difficult, but I'll try and explain it very easily as well. At some points when I feel we need to involve everybody, I will look at this man over here, and he will pose a question up on the screen. And then you will have some chances of voting. This is actually voting. And you'll get 30 seconds or something to vote. Then I'll close the voting session. And then we'll see what everybody feels. What is the feeling of the room? And then we can discuss it. But let's just have a try. Right. Okay? So, do you think gender equality is necessary for the achievement of sustainable development?
Starting very easily, yeah?
Yeah, we're starting out easily, eh?
Don't say no, just
Yeah.
You are being filmed, by the way, so be careful. Yeah.
So watch out. So try now. And if you by any chance think, oh, maybe I pressed the wrong button, there is a C. So you can, C is clear. So if you wrote 2 and you think, no, all right, I'd rather write 1, you just press clear. When you've pressed entered, 1 or 2, you press OK.
I saw the minister pressing no, actually. Yeah.
Right, and it's closing, and the result.
Ooh. All in one big happy family, yeah? Okay, well, that's a good start.
But that was the easy question.
Very
to
good.
begin with. It was a test question.
Okay, we'll come back with some more difficult questions maybe afterwards.
Yeah.
I read somewhere that somebody said that God couldn't be everywhere at all times, so he created mothers. But of course, mothers today are much more than only mothers. They are also working persons out in the labor market. And we are very fortunate today to have Director Sarah Cook, who is from the Research Institute for Social Development. And she's going to talk of women, work and welfare, policy choices for sustainable development with gender equity. So the floor is yours.
Sorry, I think I thought I was going second, so I need the PowerPoint.
PowerPoint. Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I let it go.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this, I think, very important panel today. As we know, commitments to gender equality and women's empowerment are an enduring feature of the International Development Agenda. And I come from, I should say, the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, where we focus primarily on gender equity issues in the development context. There are good reasons, both instrumental and normative, for a concern with gender equality and women's empowerment. Decades of research, and we've heard already some key points, tell us that the inclusion of girls and women on an equal basis is instrumental for economic development. And this is actually the focus on last year for the WDR, the World Development Report by the World Bank, for the first time, which is a little bit of a sad reflection, actually, for the first time focused on gender equity. But it focused on this instrumental set of issues, that gender equity is good economics. And that's important. But we also know that empowering women through giving them an education, including them in the labor force and in public and political life, not only contributes to enhanced productivity and growth, but it also leads to healthier children, families, and societies. And this is what should be our primary concern. So more fundamentally, gender equity has an intrinsic value. We have a normative or ethical commitment to gender equity as a matter of rights and social justice. And there can therefore be no justification for the persistent inequalities along gender lines. And so my starting point is that we should not have to continually justify gender equality on economic grounds, as we are often asked to do. We need to turn around the tables of this debate. We need to be able to say, we need to be able to justify our economic policies by how they're going to address these inequalities. And I would suggest that we see the same dilemma emerging in the green growth, green economy discourse being played out around us here at Rio. There is a strong case being made for a particular growth model, some shade of green, with issues of equity and social justice often being marginalized to a residual concern. And once again, we're hearing the arguments, which are important, I'm not denying them, but the arguments are that we need to get prices right, and now we're talking about the price of environmental goods and services, the price of nature. We need to alter individual behavior and institutions to be more conducive to making markets efficient and to green growth. And all this, we are told, will ultimately be good for the poor and for women. From an equity perspective, and particularly from a gender perspective, and from an ecological perspective, there are some real flaws and weak links in this logic. Through a gender lens, we are increasingly alert, and we've heard about this already today, to the critical role women play in the use and management and stewardship of key environmental resources. The livelihoods of poor women and men, and poor rural women in particular, and their ability to sustain and nurture their families are tied to fundamental issues of water, food, agriculture, forests, energy, and are critically bound up, therefore, with their natural environments. Women are primarily responsible for this work of care, nurturing families, communities, and the environment on which they depend. So there's nothing new in this, and the evidence has been there for a long time. What I want to suggest is that the struggles between competing development models that has been played out in the domain of gender has much to offer us about the common current debates on equitable and sustainable development. So looking at progress and limitations of development to date, from a dominant perspective of the instrumental or investment case, it is clear that gender equality is good for growth, and we've heard about how important women's engagement in the labour market is. But the evidence shows that the reverse causality does not hold. Even the World Bank Development Report I just mentioned acknowledges that growth is not enough to overcome persistent gender inequalities across various dimensions. Women do not necessarily benefit from growth, and growth does not necessarily generate more gender egalitarian outcomes. So without relevant policy interventions, this will equally, I would argue, apply to green growth. It all depends, and I will say more about these later on, but it depends on the patterns of growth or structural transformations, including, for example, the type of employment, not just employment, but the type of employment that is created. It depends on measures that give women access to resources, and it depends on accompanying policies that in different contexts enable women to balance their different roles and responsibilities across the market and non-market spheres, across productive and reproductive activities, paid and unpaid work. And so how this takes place depends hugely on the underlying differences also in social norms and cultural norms around women's position in home, society, and the market. I think I'm going to very quickly just go through some progress and limitations, but I think this we don't need to dwell on. We know these, and I want to get to some more fundamental points. But we know that primary education has become more gender equitable, but gaps remain particularly here at the secondary and tertiary levels. We know that there's been progress in women's political participation, but we also know that the Nordic experience tells us that around 30% is the critical mass needed to have impact in changing policies and decisions, and most is well below that. We know that things like maternal mortality are improving with the MDGs, but still are a major risk factor for women. And women almost everywhere are more likely to be in poverty. And these are for sub-Saharan Africa. These are the countries in sub-Saharan Africa where more women are poor than men. Turning to employment and labour force participation, women's work tends to be a key variable used in discussions of gender equity. Paid employment gives women control over income, greater independence outside the household, access to public spaces, is considered a key route for empowerment and a status of empowerment. So we have seen improvements, but we also see big wage gaps between men and women, still in many parts of the world, very varied, of course. There are a lot of reasons why women have entered the labour market. Some of them are very positive. But we also need to note that, that some women enter the labour market because of the pressure due to economic crisis, and they enter it under very unequal and problematic terms. And we also see persistent gender gaps and biases in terms of the occupations, the occupational segregation, and the wage gaps. And women remain predominantly in agricultural employment, which is often subsistence agriculture, not even counted, but they have less access to formal paid employment. And even in the informal sector, they tend to be focused in the most vulnerable sectors of that triangle that is there. Latest figures actually from the ILO suggest that it would take 75 years at current rates of progress for women to achieve equal remuneration for equal work or work of equal value. All these factors also affect women's access to social protection, and they neglect the real challenges that many poor women in smallholder or subsistence agriculture face. So overall, the evidence suggests that even rapid growth, which has occurred during some of this period in some countries, does not lead to a reduction in these or significant reduction in gender disadvantage. And as I've said, I think the same obstacles will apply whether or not growth is green. So the key then is to understand whether or how green growth can be good for women, or whether in fact we need a more fundamental critique of the ideas we're hearing about green economy and green growth, and I think we do. We need to understand what accounts for these varied outcomes and under what circumstances progress towards gender equity has been achieved. And I think the main explanation underpinning this is that market-led growth, which is the dominant paradigm for growth, does not really work for women. i.e., we need to shift the economic paradigm, but we need to look at the public policies that are necessary. And women come to the market with very different constraints and different resources. They have different access to land and credit. They have different education, human capital, social networks. They are constrained by their social obligations, their family obligations. But also the market itself is socially embedded and reflects gendered norms of those societies, which are often discriminatory. And so a gendered analysis of markets as social institutions shows that the labour markets depend on the unpaid economy for reproduction of labour, and as a result, gendered outcomes cannot be explained by standard models of competitive markets. And crucially, we see this in the division of reproductive work in the domestic sphere, which has not altered in most parts of the world. And only in the Nordic countries is the total amount of time spent in work, paid and unpaid, by men and women equal. In all other parts, this is just for developed countries, it's still unequal, and even more unequal in lower income countries where we have much less data. This is from the research that we undertook in a range of countries, and you can still see that between men and women work longer hours total, but they do much more of the unpaid, unremunerated work. And if we disaggregate among lower income women by income, we see that lower income households dedicate much more time to this the unpaid labor because obviously collecting fuel, water, etc., takes up a huge amount of time. And I think this is important in policy terms, in terms of the kind of social infrastructure. Giving cash transfers, giving money to poor households is important. But the social infrastructure that needs to be invested in is much more critical for women's work. I think there are important policy implications. So very briefly, what works, when, where, and how? We know from the dominant development model that things are not working. First, I think the idea that market-led growth is sufficient to create employment and raise families out of poverty is flawed, and we've seen that playing out. Second, that welfare policies can be reduced just to cash transfers is problematic. And third, that if we do those two things, market-led growth and minimal social protection, we can reduce inequality. And this, I think, is a key issue, that we need to focus not just on poverty, but on inequality and the relations between. This is an issue of distribution, which has become not a valid target of public policy, but needs to be brought back into the public policy arena. So very briefly, we have alternatives, and the alternatives come from a number of states where you've seen different kinds of patterns of growth with equity and poverty reduction, but with variations in gender equity. And I'm just going to talk briefly about the differences between the Asian model, where you had more authoritarian development states in the developmental phase, focused on development, not just growth, and not just on pro-poor policies, but on broader social policies. The East Asian model, and I think this is important, was characterized by export-led industrialization, but alongside investments in the rural sector and education. In Korea, for example, the export sector was dependent on women's work. So women came into the labor force in large numbers, particularly young women. But the women did not share fully the gains in terms of wages and social security. And it was a political mobilization that then led to democratization, a push towards more universal social provisioning. But we still see very unequal gendered outcomes. By contrast, in the Nordic model, very similar, democratic rather than authoritarian, focus on development and broader social policies. But with the Nordic welfare states, women were able to gain a much stronger foothold in the labor market under relatively good working conditions and subject to a small gender wage gaps. Gender-based segmentation persists in the labor market in most countries, but there is a much more redistributive mechanisms at work. And the critical issue, in addition to the care and family and other welfare policies, is that these public services are a critical employer of women. And so expanding those sectors is one of the key mechanisms through which women get incorporated into a labor market on better terms, on equal terms, so you can have jobs that are decent. Interestingly, these kind of jobs are also essentially green jobs. So I think I've made the points that I think the key thing is the type of jobs. You have very different outcomes for women depending where jobs are created and what the nature of these jobs are. Political alliances and activism are critical for the kind of policies that get promoted. And we need social policies that not only are protection, smoothing incomes, but also involve social investments, redistribution, and attention to the care economy and social production. And they do make a difference, so we can see different outcomes. I'll just show you the Nordic model on poverty of single mothers. You can see how different it is, say, from a liberal Anglo-Saxon model. But reflecting this, my final slide, on the links between these debates on gender equity and sustainable development. Obviously, we know that gender equity is important for various reasons, and we know that there are clear links between women's activities and roles and the environment. I think we also need to understand the nature of how we analyze these processes. both include things that are not valued by the market. Unpaid care work is not valued in the market. Environmental services, we can try and put prices on them, but they have different values. They can't all be commodified, marketized, monetized. We need to understand those different, often competing values on these goods. We need to understand that institutions matter and are very local and context-specific, and there's a lot of research on this. So solutions, therefore, also have to be local and context-specific. The ways in which women organize, the ways in which communities collectively act together to manage both production and reproduction, but also environmental preservation, is critical. Government policy is necessary, and the work on the social protection floor shows that it is feasible and affordable. We can have social policies that combine environmental goals. We can bring together economic and environmental policies, and we're seeing that in this region with the sort of socio-environmental policies, the Bolsa Floresta and things like that. We're also seeing in the north more eco-social policies, I would say, concerned with changing behavior and consumption. We need to think about the care and reproductive economy as a generator of green jobs. And we need policy action, which we can, because if we don't, women will be among, or particularly poor women, will be among the losers of climate change and green economy. Thank you.
Judy Stanford. Thank you very much, Sarah. Very interesting statistics. I wonder if you have any question or comment from the audience to Sarah, as we have her here. There was a wealth of knowledge behind all these slides, some very interesting comparisons between different types of systems and why women score higher in certain societies than others. Anything you'd like to question about that, or something you'd like to ponder a little more upon, then the chance is yours. Yes, please. Name and country, please.
DSM, I work for a Nordic development agency, and we work with projects, and I think your presentation was excellent. The thing is, how do you bring that model over to what we actually do in projects when we do investments? That's the whole trick. Because if you're going to wait another 50 or 75 years until we make changes, then that's going to be a bit frustrating, right?
Yeah.
So what is the solution?
I think the solutions are local and context specific, but I think we have good examples, and I think you'll hear a little bit more. I thought we were going to be in another order, but of some specific examples of where green jobs have been created, where some of these programs of bringing together social and environment protections together have been managed. But I think there are things we can do at that level. I think attention to this unpaid reproductive care economy and the social investments that underpin that, i.e. not just the cash transfer model and privatizing, monetizing all of these social protection interventions is the dominant approach for many developing countries at the moment. Unless that's accompanied by social investments, investments that enable more collective action, that reduce the costs, and these are things like collecting fuel and water for rural households, and there are environmentally mechanisms to do that. We have a lot of evidence on the ground. These need to be introduced more systematically, scaled up, but there need to be social investments, not just cash transfers, which will not lead to the social and collective investment. But I still think that it's important to keep in mind that this more macro picture of what's happening in the wider economy is what's going to drive some of these outcomes. And we need somehow to link and to be able to try and ensure that there are at least arguments for change at that level.
Very good. I think that this merits a power vote question, don't you?
Yeah, because we hear a lot about in your presentation about the benefit of women. Women equals gender equality, kind of. So we have a question for all of you. Yes. Is the inclusion of women's empowerment into sustainable development beneficial for men? So please, let's try and vote. You want? Yeah, you want to vote. Of course you can. Right, and I see closing. Are you done, Sarah? Yeah?
I think so.
Good. Let's see the result. Yes, because I am actually really happy about this result. Because, you know, sometimes we're talking about gender equality being a win-win situation, but how do we actually convey this? Or is it perceived like that? And perhaps, have you got any ideas on how to present this as a win-win situation? Because when we talk about gender equality, we always talk about it as a women's issue. So have you got anything? Or the audience afterwards?
Yeah, no, I would say, you know, we can't talk about sustainability and sustainable development if it's not the whole population. So if we're going to improve sustainability through women's empowerment, then it has to be good for the whole population. I think that that's sort of, to me, a given. However, we do see trade-offs in the discussion, in the nature of the discussion. You know, who's going to win in terms of jobs, incomes? There are always winners and losers from any situation. So we can say we can share the winners and the losers more equitably. We can have better mechanisms for reducing the costs of the losses. But I think ultimately these are about shifting. It's not about individuals. It's about the shifting in societal relations, cultural relations, power relations and norms. And I think that's what we have to, if we can focus on these structural and societal issues and not so much on the individual men and women, then we'll be moving forward. And I think, you know, there's been much more forward progress in some parts of the world, and the Nordic countries are an example. But it is fundamentally, both in terms of poverty and in terms of gender, it's about social and power relations that we need to alter. And we can do that, I think, in ways that are beneficial for households, families, communities, and societies, and therefore beneficial for men as well as women.
And there's a woman over there. Yeah? Yes?
First, you were first, yeah.
Hi, my name is Naya Nathanielsen, and I'm a politician for Greenland. And, well, I'm a proud feminist. I've been working with women's rights on a grassroots level and as a politician. And I think I truly recognize the problems that women face, the structural problems regarding to power and the right to vote, the violence, all these issues. But I do feel we alienate men in the way we discuss this. It seems to me that when we talk about gender equality, we talk about women's rights, and we don't talk so much about the men. And I do worry about the way we define and discuss men in this debate. It seems that we call them lazy, they're violent, they're ignorant, they don't participate, they don't recognize our rights. And I think we need to infuse some humanism into this debate. So it's not solely a matter of feminism, because we need everybody to move forward, and we need to make this matter relevant for men as well, I think. It is them who need to give up some power, and it is men who need to define how they are a part of the solution in terms of a job market and in the homes and in politics. So we need to include men much more than we do now, and we need to make men a part of the solution, I think.
Well spoken. And there's the woman in the green blouse.
And then afterwards, men, and then we have to close. Yeah. Yeah, first, yeah.
Thank you, Eva Hallström from Sweden, Green Woman. I like your point that you said, because then I say in Sweden, we have these take care of our children, and then the men are supposed to go home for 3 months. And then we can see well it's changed for the men when they are carrying small babies, and then you can also have the change in the prams as well. They are very good now because they are better technicals. Yes. And then I also want to, you have to work from the top and to the bottom. And there is also the one that are employed drivers for lorries in Sweden. They have found out that women drive more carefully, use less petrol, and drive more environment friendly, and don't have so much accident. And that's why the companies of lorries, they want to employ women because they don't cost so much. But they have to calculate it first to see that is right. So I think we need to have this calculation in economics and see that it can benefit on the environment as well. And then you can see that you want to employ women because they drive more environment friendly. Thank you.
Interesting point of view.
Could I just add to this? Because out there, sorry, I thought you were finished. Okay. Yeah. Outside, there's some links, because during the Danish EU presidency, we have actually found all these, made several studies on climate change in the energy sector and the transport sector. And we have all the proof and all the evidence you need to go back and convince governments or other actors that it can, what the differences are and what can pay off. You?
Yeah, I'm Kees van der Rees from ILO. When I voted, I had a moment of doubt because I know in a lot of situations where actually I would have voted no. And then you came, Sarah, in your response to the vote with the notion of trade-offs and with transition. I think there's an important element of time, of short-term versus long-term.
Yeah.
I remember a case where we worked with Tanzanian community-based waste collection systems, and we tried to engage as much as possible with women initiatives, women groups, very successfully, until we hit the municipal government and its regulatory pattern, regulatory services, regulatory policies, and started discussing about privatizing these waste collection services to those women groups. And it was generally quite an awareness and an interest until the municipal service workers heard of it and started feeling threatened about their jobs. This was going to be social privatization of waste collection services, but men, waste collectors in municipal services were going to get either rid of their job or they would change their job so that they wouldn't qualify anymore. So we needed just transition. We needed a way to skill up those municipal service workers to become supervisors, promoters, and helpers, whereas the women and other groups could be engaged, meaningfully and in a decent way in waste collection services. So that is a very important point, that an economic empowerment, economic participation, as you pointed out, market inclusion can work, but it has to be accompanied with these policies where we look at the trade-offs and the gains for all.
You agree, Sarah?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the time element, that these sustainable development is a long-term objective, and we're wanting to move quite quickly on some of these critical issues, and there's going to be a tension. There's a very interesting point. A lot of the discussion about smallholder agriculture is about women being less risk-averse, and is that good? So your example is very interesting because it's a positive spin on this, what we know from all the psychological things, that women tend to be more risk-averse. So I think that's it's a counter to some of the arguments which are saying, oh, well, it's not good to be risk-averse. So
thank you very much so far to Sarah, and our second keynote speaker is Thelma Viala, who is the Special Representative and Director of the ILO Office to the United Nations. And we are going straight into the gender equality and green jobs at the heart of sustainability. Please.
Ever since the ILO was established in 1919, after the Treaty of Versailles, after the First World War, one of the core values of the ILO is equality for men and women in the world of work. Gender equality is at the heart of decent work. The primary goal of ILO today is to promote opportunities for both men and women to obtain decent and productive work in conditions of freedom, equity, security, and human dignity. Good morning to all of you. I'm Thelma Viari, as have been introduced, and it's a great honor for me to be here on behalf of ILO to talk about gender equality and green jobs at the heart of sustainability. It is also a great honor to be here before you as a woman from El Salvador, coming from a very poor country where women, in addition to poverty, they do not have a fair opportunity for social inclusion. The 21st century obviously is proving that it is a time for great change for the world. It is a time for great challenges for people and for business. And the understanding of the issues such as equality, social inclusion, and decent work opportunities for all has never been so important and so debated. I would like to talk to you this morning about the challenges related to gender equity today. I would then like to shed some light on the opportunities of a greener economy, how this can provide an opportunity to overcoming these challenges by placing women at the center of sustainable development and achieving gender equality. If this transition to a greener economy is going to happen, and in many ways is already happening, it's to see how we can make it a place and a great opportunity to put higher levels of the possibilities for this gender equality to be achieved, meaning for both a fair contribution for men and women. While it is accepted globally that it is necessary to improve living standards, poverty reduction for both women and men, there are still some major challenges that stand in the way of achieving this objective. Poverty is increasingly feminized, and gender pay gaps still exist. Women account for 66% of the world's output, and yet they earn less than 10% of that income. There is a lack of decent work opportunities, and especially full-time work for women. Cultural, economic, and social barriers, they still restrict the full participation of women in the economy. Women, and in particular rural women, are usually responsible not only for providing the basic nutrition, but yet they have less access to and less control over the productive resources like land, technology, and information about the labor markets. This persistent gender inequality, including high numbers of women in the informal employment and fewer women involved in decision-making, means that women are marginalized when it comes to addressing issues of climate change and environmental issues and benefiting from the new job opportunities. Worst of all, there is still gender-based violence. It still occurs at all stages of women's lives. All of these challenges are putting women in a more vulnerable position at times where we are facing a global economic crisis and many changes in the climate. The impact of climate change, it's not gender neutral. As it has been said today, women, particularly in developing countries, are much more vulnerable than men to the negative consequences of climate change. In most countries, poor groups bear the brunt of climate change, not only because they tend to be more dependent on the natural resources, especially in the rural areas, but also because they lack the requisite capacity and the empowerment to adapt to the climate change. You have about 2/3 of the world's population living in poverty that are women. which underlies their greater vulnerability to the changing climate. According to June Settling, the executive director at the New York-based Women's Environment and Development, women and children are 14 times more likely to die during a natural disaster, as it has been also mentioned today, and yet the gender perspective is still missing in many of the climate discussions that we're having. So for the vast majority of women in the informal sector and in small enterprises, lacking capital access and credit and information make it that recovering from these devastating effects of the environmental degradation and disaster becomes nearly impossible. We have the ILO Greens Jobs initiatives, which provides support to seize these opportunities, to overcome some of these challenges, which have so persistently faced women for years. This program was launched in 2008 to promote opportunity, equity, and a just transition to the sustainable economies, and to mobilize governments, employers, and workers to engage in a dialogue on coherent policies that will be leading to a green economy and green jobs and decent work for all. Green jobs contribute to sustainable development and help realize this triple social, economic, and environmental development that we mean when we talk about sustainability. So firstly, we have the social benefit that is derived from the promotion of decent work, poverty eradication, and social inclusion. Then there is the economic benefit, which is generated through the development of viable enterprises and in economic sectors. And thirdly, we have the environmental benefit through the building of climate change resilience, supporting low emission development, higher resource efficiency, and to safeguard stable natural environment and hopefully lasting biodiversity. So how can work, decent work, help seize the opportunities to achieve this gender equality that we're talking about and have poverty eradication in this transition to a greener economy? Through the greening of the economy, women can be prioritized in the role as economic and social actors that they are by better valuing it. This is the case, for example, in the tourism Costa dos Coqueiros in the northeastern Brazilian state of Bahia. This project helps to promote sustainable local development by establishing the linkages between tourism activities and local development, with an emphasis on the role of women. In partnership with the Brazilian training institutions, more than 5,000 people have been trained in English, literacy, computer skills, civil engineering, and organic agriculture. And literacy has reduced from 36.8 to 8 to 9%. Family income levels have increased, and the generation of employment, work, and income have a hugely positive impact in the vast majority of the participants in this project. In addition, improvements in the manufacturing of crafts have impacted positively on women, and it has helped to yield income increases up to 500%. In order to promote the social inclusiveness in the transition to a greener economy, both men and women should benefit from education and the training activities and the labor market policies that facilitate the development of the skills that are necessary for these emerging new jobs that will come. And similarly, assisting in this skill development for the transition for all workers whose jobs will no longer exist, their needs could be addressed. We have another example in Bangladesh, where we have been working with a barefoot college to equip women with the necessary skills to assemble and service solar panels in remote villages. The women build solar kits for their communities, and they also learn how to repair them and how to maintain them. Furthermore, they scale up the knowledge, so it is secure by helping women to train others. The effects have been enormous, The availability of light has impacted positively on the education. There is an increase in productivity and in rural entrepreneurship. And gender relations have improved, and it has even helped reduce infant mortality rates. The women are empowered and recognized by the community based on their knowledge for this unique skill. We can say that businesses can also serve as a key enabler of economic and social inclusion by creating the platforms for all to be citizens, to be agents of change in the society. Enterprises and new businesses around the green ideas are opening up on the possibilities of a better quality of life for many workers, and its positive repercussions bring about a better environmental quality, which improves the lives of both men and women and their families and their communities. An example of this, we have it in Kenya, where a firm has discovered a way to turn plastic waste into profitable business venture. Lorna Ruto is the founder of Global Bioenergy, a company that manufactures fencing posts from recycled consumer plastic waste. This is in Kenya, she says. Currently in Kenya, thousands of plastic bags and bottles litter our streets and clog our sewers. Our business converts this waste into durable, affordable, cost-effective, and environmental-friendly plastic poles. The initiative contributes to the environment by recycling waste and reducing the number of trees being cut off. It also creates new employment opportunities. As economic sectors are greened, measures can be channeled to address poverty eradication. Energy poverty, for example, poses, in addition to total access, a disproportionately high expenditure for poor households. In much of Asia, Latin America, Africa, and some parts of Europe, the share of expenditure for energy is 3 times higher for poor households than for richer ones, and it can be up to 20 times higher. So energy-efficient social housing, for example, can result in large savings and then have income gains for the poor families. One example from ILO is the collaboration that we have with the Brazilian government in an industry model that designs and implements a program called Minha Casa Minha Vida, My House, My Life. One of the initiatives of the program is to provide solar warm water heaters in 350,000 social houses in the southern half of Brazil. Energy bills are reduced and local industry is supported, which in turn creates new jobs. We have many examples of these. We have an example in Ethiopia, where we have 94% of the women, of people who cook with firewood. And as the wood becomes scarcer, women must often spend hours searching and carrying it over long distances. We have seen many pictures and films about this. And intensive capacity building has led to the establishment of a growing market for energy-efficient biomass stoves. With the assistance from the ILO, more than 450 stove producers in 225 districts were trained in technical and business skills. Assistance for business startup was provided, and a network of stove enterprises was established. More than 65% of the stoves were unemployed, of the stove producers. So before joining the business, and then we had 36% of these producers who then were women. So the project has provided more than 134,000 people with modern energy and efficient stoves. I will stop on the example, but these are some examples of how things, if put in a larger scale, are already making a difference and can make much more of a difference. But as for any transition, the poor and the vulnerable need to be protected, and the resilience needs to be strengthened. The transition to a greener economy is not going to be an exception, and new jobs will be created, some jobs will be reprofiled, and some jobs will be phased out. The ILO has estimated that this structural change will affect at least half of the global workforce. And to ensure fair and an inclusive transition, labor market policies accompanied by social protection measures have to be formulated and implemented. A gender focus is essential in both the analysis, in anticipating the changes, as well as ensuring access for those affected to the retraining and the skills that we need to be upgraded for all. Without the proper social policies to support health and basic needs, gender equality is at fault and will always be at fault. This is where the role of the social protection floor is of essence to empower women to participate in decent work opportunities. The ILO has been working for a long time towards expanding this concept of the social protection floor. And this initiative has been a UN effort led jointly by the ILO and the World Health Organization, which supports countries in planning and implementing sustainable social transfer schemes and essential social services. It is a policy approach that aims to provide a set of guarantees for basic health care and income based on the human rights principle of basic needs, and it focuses on the life cycle, including children, youth, the vulnerable groups, and the elderly. The social protection floor has to be seen as an investment to any society to achieve an inclusive society. Currently, nearly 80% of the global population, that is 5 billion people, lack any access to basic social protection, that is essential health care and basic income security throughout the life cycle. Exactly 5 days ago at the International Labour Conference, we closed our 101st session unanimously adopting a landmark recommendation that requests countries to implement their social protection floors as early as possible in national development processes. There are many positive examples in Latin America, Asia, and Africa where countries have successfully implemented the entire floor or at least part of it. And this example shows that social protection for all is affordable nearly everywhere, even if it starts at a lower base. And the new recommendation explicitly says that people employed in the informal sector, as in the formal economy, should also benefit from the social security. With 1.4 billion people in the world earning less than $125 a day, and most of them being women and children, national social protection floors are powerful instruments to addressing these imbalances that we have today. The value of social protection floor in absorbing the economic shocks to individual households and the wider economy has been documented. The same mechanisms at work in periods of crisis can also facilitate this green transition that we are all talking about. For example, protecting redundant workers as they look for the new opportunities or undergo training. They can be an important part of a package of measures that help the poor in developing countries affected by climate change and for addressing issues that I have mentioned before, such as energy poverty. Social protection can be used for large-scale investments in rural productive capacity and climate resistance, as it has been demonstrated in the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act in India, and the extended public works programs also in South Africa. Income support schemes can also be used to pay poor households for environmental services. They provide by protecting the forests, as it has been mentioned also today, marine life, as it is in the case of the Green Grant in Brazil, or the Plan Nacional de Quisqueya Verde at the Dominican Republic. Governments, enterprises, and workers should continue to be encouraged to promote the incorporation of fair gender perspectives into their national policies, action plans, and other measures of sustainable development and climate change, keeping in mind that the poorest, the most vulnerable groups are often the ones who are going to be in the front line of economic and climate natural disasters. The aim is not simply to help women to better fulfillment as human beings, but to empower them in their roles as mothers, caregivers, professionals, decision makers, in any challenges where the strengths are of value to advance global social economic development. So to conclude, ILO experience is demonstrating that if women are placed at the center of a greener, more socially inclusive economy with more opportunities for decent work, higher incomes, the formalization of employment, and basic social protection floors, gender equality can be achieved and poverty can be eradicated, not only for women, but for children, the elderly, and all the vulnerable groups that until now are largely linked to them. So, empowerment of women. Yes, so that we can achieve a balanced situation where women and men equally participate in the economy, in the society, and in family life in all its cycles. As we continue our discussion, I would like to invite you to reflect on at least 3 or 2 main measures that must be taken into account among all stakeholders when we are talking about sustainable gender equality at the national and at the global level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Telma, for those very clear points and shocking things about women being 14 times more prone to death at disasters and stuff like that. Very clear points. I suppose this warrants a power question, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Well, you're talking about labour market. And we're talking about the participation, the increased participation by women. And we have a little question for all of you. Here it comes. So, in Scandinavia in the 60s, women's participation at the labour market exploded. How much did that add approximately to the GNP, gross national product? Okay, just for the newcomers, please take one of these. If you think the answer is 1, 5%, you press 1. And you press OK. If you change your mind, you just press C for clear.
Not after the OK, he says.
Huh?
You cannot
And
check.
after, okay, yeah, after you've pressed OK, that's it.
Just like an ordinary election. You vote and that's it.
Right, so I think we're all done. So please, let us see. Yeah, right. Well, the thing is that it is actually 60%. So most of you, 40%, but 60% of you were right. And that is quite a lot. So what we're talking about here, and following up on what you were saying, the fact is that we have to realize that it's not only a matter of allowing women into the labor market or, you know, trying to say that's just or that's fair to do that. They need a place in the labor market. It does pay off. So do you think, I mean, this is in Scandinavia in the 60s, do you think this could be sort of correlated could we see the same kind of growth if we got more women into the green jobs? Or what is your impression of that?
Well, I think that it's very difficult to say cause and effect. Correlations even are difficult, but when you see the examples of things that have worked, taking into account the national context, the guess would be that yes, it would make a difference. Notwithstanding the contributions that women are already making, but probably that are not being recorded in the numbers.
Very good. Before we have a coffee break, a short coffee break, there is room for 1 or 2 interventions from the audience. Yes, please. Where do you come from? Your name.
From Finland. And Telma was talking. Thank you very much for your interesting information. And you discussed also the climate change and very poor participation of women in the climate negotiations. I would just like to share with you a small piece of information. So Nordic countries have been, during the 4 recent years, supporting wider participation of women in climate negotiations, because we have understood that the empowerment of women also there would mean a lot for the better taking care of water resources, adapting to changing situation in agriculture, and then also understanding the meaning and importance of renewable energy, so improving their lives and actually participating in this development of green economy. So particularly Finland, Denmark and Iceland have been financially supporting the participation of women in these negotiations. So now more than 100, let's say, negotiating trips have also been already been financed, and we have related to this activity also awareness raising of all the negotiators. More than 2,000 negotiators have been met in connection of the negotiations in UN meetings like this in New York. And then we have organized also capacity building for our negotiators, so that this has led actually to more the awareness raising than this financial contribution to the fact that number of women has increased from 20% to 30%. And with 30%, we are already close to that, which is some kind of creating a critical mass. And we are very unhappy still that we didn't achieve the new convention or protocol in Copenhagen, but since Copenhagen we have actually then targeted the programs of the climate convention. So in 8 programs we have already achieved proper gender integration, and now in all the 7 new institutions which were established in Durban, there is in the modalities, decision and participation, the gender equality. So these institutions are now working on the finance, technology, adaptation, social impacts of response measures, etc. So that I think the situation has slightly improved.
Very good, thank you very much. Then there is the woman over there.
Hi.
Short and sweet, please.
Very short. I am Melina Abelson. I'm the Minister for Finance in Greenland. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I was just, it made me think of that. You said that women are often the victims of climate change, or are often the first that experience the climate change. And this is just a short intervention to say that in Greenland it's actually the opposite way around. Many men, they live from fishery. Actually, that's our main export. And because of climate change, many men are now experiencing unemployment, while the women often work in the public sector. And that's giving, indeed, a problematic labor market issues for us in Greenland. And I think many indigenous peoples in the north, I don't know if this is only in the Arctic or maybe also in other indigenous peoples community, that's actually a main issue that we are discussing now, that the men are without the jobs because they are the victims of climate change. And it's just to take that into consideration that we should maybe try to include having both the men and the women equally taking part in new green jobs, so we don't see that inequality between the genders in unemployment, which is a major issue.
Thank you very much for that very interesting piece of information from Greenland. Now the last intervention before we break for coffee.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and I love those examples of the sun cells, because sun energy is enough for everyone. So that was a very good example. I would like to tell you from Green Women, we have a report that says green feminist economy is gender equal and sustainable, and I have it with me if you are interested. But I also have a good example from Sweden and from the county where I come from in Värmland, and we have reduced our emissions of greenhouse gases 57%. It's done, and it's done in 4 years. So we will show that it's possible in 4 years to reduce greenhouse gases with 7%, and it's done. And I have some brochure here how we have done that, and the amount of greenhouse gases that we have there. One amount of this is going to be reduced this year by 50%, and we will do it this year. So, more action, and as you say, good examples. So that's why I want to share it, if you're interested. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Could I just add that some of the issues you took up was also political participation and you know, actually women entering educations where they can enter the green sector afterwards. Within the EU, as we speak almost, in a few hours, the Ministers for Employment and Social Policies and Gender Equality is going to adopt a Council conclusion with 4 indicators. Because in the EU, being part of the Danish presidency, we are very, very concerned that women, even in the EU, are not participating enough in the green sector. In these so-called STEM cases, where STEM lines of education, science, technology, engineering, and math. So what we're doing now is that we're placing it high on the political agenda. All the ministers are discussing it almost as we speak, at least in a few hours. And they're going to adopt some indicators on the gender balance in decision-making, in climate change-related issues, and the gender balance within the STEM lines. So that's going to be very interesting, very concrete in order to follow up, are we doing enough? So on this point...
That's very good. A lot of good concrete things are going on. We'd like to give a little gift to our 2 main speakers. Telma, there we are. This is a disc on Scandinavian women singing and chanting, etc.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much.
There will now be a 10-minute coffee break. Afterwards, we'll go on for approximately 1 more hour. And if you hang in there, you'll all be served a very, very good lunch at the end.
It's
all right?
Nordic food based on Brazilian crops and stuff.
Good, a good mixture. Yeah. Okay, so 10-minute coffee break.
Yeah. And there will be a chance for everybody to get back in the panel discussion.
Joseph Conrad once said that being a woman is a terribly difficult task, since it means principally dealing with men all the time. But of course, the Nordic model is very clear when it comes to gender equality. That it is a question of both women and men, of course, together. In that sense, we should have had maybe a man or 2 in the panel, and originally we had our own Minister of Environment who was supposed to sit in the panel. But as you are all aware of, we are in the middle of a very hot debate at the Rio Center just now. The final text has been, you know, published, and all the ministers, a lot of the ministers, have been rushing back to take part in that. And our own Gro Harlem Brundtland, the mother of the Brundtland Report from 1987, she was supposed to have graced us with her presence here today, but she couldn't make it. That's unfortunate, of course, but we're still a very, very good group of people here. And it is with immense pleasure that, some pressure, but mostly pleasure, I'd say. Mostly pleasure. Yes, that we have one of the strongest exponents of equality in the Nordic countries with us today, which is Tarja Halonen. She was, I believe, the first female president of Finland. elected in the year 2000, if I'm right, and she stayed in office for approximately 12 years.
Not yeah, one week more, I think.
1 week more. Well, you have to get the record straight. 1 week more. And she has often been labeled as Mother Finland, and obviously having had such a long period to put her mark on that country is quite an achievement. We also have Anita Brodén, who is a parliamentarian at the Nordic Council of Ministers. We were supposed to have the Swedish Minister of Environment too, but she couldn't make it. Anita works a lot on environmental issues. We have Annika Olsen, who is a minister from the Faroe Islands on social issues and such. And a very quick overview, the Nordic countries are then 5 countries. We have Finland, we have Sweden, we have Norway, we have Denmark and Iceland, and with the 2 3 fairly autonomous areas of the Faroe Islands, Greenland and Åland, yes. So those constitute then the Nordic countries and the particular outlook on life, which is a trademark of the Nordic democracies. So let's hear from the panelists. Tarja Halonen, what is your take on the issues that we are having here in front of us today?
So if I start with 2 comments, which are not, of course, in my text. Is it not?
Just check if it's on.
Yeah.
You have to check.
Okay.
Is it on? It's okay?
Okay. So the first is, of course, that if we think that's just these sovereign states, independent states, so there are 5. And normally, when I speak about the Nordic countries, I call them Nordic sisters, not brothers, sisters. And the reason for that is that traditionally, we say that caring is something feminine. And these Nordic sisters are caring societies. We call them welfare states or welfare societies. But we are caring both men and women, adults and children. And this is not just trying to be caring too much. We think that this is a way how all individuals can try their best. But if the dreams don't come true, the society might give another chance. It means also the agreement between the generations, which has been necessary in the extreme north. You can't survive if you don't work very hard. But even after you have tried very hard, it can be so that the harvest doesn't success. And that's why you have to help your neighbor. And that's, I think, the basic idea in all Nordic countries, and I think that has been also in autonomous areas like Greenland or Faroe or Northern Ireland, especially when they're surrounded by the sea. So I think that so we have all used to that when we were small ones. We were used to that already, girls and boys. That you have to try hard. Don't cry. Just try it. It's not so hard what it was with your fathers and mothers. And then for us, it's sometimes very difficult to understand. And I think that it has been also a little bit here in the discussion that the traditions are different in different countries. And to change the traditions can be a different. In that way, it's a very big challenge when I was co-chairing together with President Jacob Zuma of South Africa, this sustainability panel, which launched its unanimous report last January, and that was the report helping the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to come here to Rio. And it was like it is with the babies. All of us who have seen that just newborn baby, it can be beautiful in the eyes of the father and mother, but all the others will say polite, oh yeah, it will come better. You know, like that. And then that has happened also to our report. Immediately after the report, we thought that at least we tried our best. But now, when we follow these negotiations here in Rio and all the preparations, not so bad, quite sweet, nice baby. And in this report, I think that it's good to say what's interesting in that. First, if we take the panel was not quite typical in international affairs, because it was 50-50, men and women. Even the co-chairs were men and women, men from the south, women from the north. I have done it previously with some other African presidents too. But now, this time, very often the journalists said that to us that, is it difficult to work when one is with the different religions from the south with four wives and a little bit more so-called traditional wives, and you are the Protestant woman from the north. And not so much. We both started to working with the workers and as syndicalists. So we know that it's not enough that you have a freedom, but you have to have freedom and bread. So we succeeded with all these other 20 experts, excellent, eminent persons from different parts of the world. We succeeded to make an unanimous report. By the way, speaking about the Nordic countries, one of them was the Swedish Gunilla Carlsson. One was the grandmother of all sustainable development, Gro Harlem Brundtland from Norway, and then even the representative of the EU Commission was a Danish one, a Danish lady. So there were quite many Nordic. It was quite a much Nordic dimension there. But I have to say thanks for all other members from different parts of the world, from not only from South Africa, but Mozambique and Emirates and many other places, that they were very, very good people to understand that the future of the planet will success only if we use all human capital what we have, which means men and women, and also the poor, and also unemployed, young and old. But if I quote one paragraph in the panel's sustainability vision, and that's any serious shift towards sustainable development requires gender equality. Half of mankind's collective intelligence and capacity is a resource we must nurture and develop for the sake of multiplied generations to come. The next increment of the global growth would welcome from the full economic empowerment of women. When you have here this how much the women's empowerment will mean, so we had an opportunity to use the recent studies all around the world, and that's really true, and you wrote it quite correctly. It means very much. And there is a link between gender equality and the economic prosperity of the nation. And many international studies have clearly shown that the more we do to ensure equal participation in the economy, the better prospects there are for the whole society. So there is also a lot of such kind of the work what was mentioned. Deba took it very nicely. What women work, they are not lazy, they work very much, but it's not all recorded. We don't know really what's the impact. But the second point is that we know also that they could do it much better if they wouldn't have those gender barriers. For instance, the UN Economic Council for Africa has estimated that 70% of informal traders are women, and that informal trade is the main source of job creation in Africa. And so we have to know also that how to handle this, that when we are trying to make the best, that we are not doing the harm too. So you had also good statistics already here concerning the food security, because it's very important that these 7 billion people in the future, perhaps 9 or more, will get food. And so if female farmers had the same access to resources as male ones, agricultural output could increase, and at the same time the role of women could be strengthened within households. We know it from the different projects very well. So, and then the last point I would take concerning this gender is concerning, it's a terrible word because it's concerning the babies, but reproductive rights. Because I always get thinking about this fine UN word that is like an industry, but anyway, getting the babies or not getting the babies. And this is also a very important issue for the women, because not all babies are those they have hoped to have. And educating women is also a crucial factor in improving child health and reducing infant mortality. And we should especially pay more attention to adolescent girls who should be at school and not wives or mothers. And also many girls and women live in fear of violence and in fear for their own health. This is, of course, much also in the South, but this is a phenomenon which has not disappeared in the North. I mean, we have to see that family violence seems to be something very, very difficult issue. It is in all countries. It is in North, South, East, West. Some way we will speak it more openly, like we speak in the Nordic countries, but in some other countries it's a family affair. You don't speak to the others. And if you allow me, just as to say that I have been 40 years in politics. That's a good side to be an old lady, that you have long experience, a lot of memories, as long as you remember them. I was a Minister of Equality in the late 1980s, and so it was a set-up meeting in Austria, in Vienna, and we had a lot of discussions at home in Finland that whether I would take a risk to tell about the family violence. But because it is a problem in Finland, so we thought that I go and speak. And so after I have spoken, and I can tell it in this meeting also by the names. So the very nice representative of China came to me and said, "So bad," with the translator, "so bad with you that you have the family violence." I was like, and then I said, "Madam, I think it's an international phenomenon, but we think that that's enough and we will speak about it." And even that was in '88, if I remember correctly, the year. So still today, we are in the same situation, not only concerning the family violence, but also, for instance, the child brides or something else, that we think that what these people say when we go abroad to the international meeting where we should be proud of our profile of the country, and then we tell that we have this and that, which is not so good. But I hope that we can get more such kind of the sisterhood or brotherhood or whatever you would like to call it, that we can say that, yes, we have a problem, but we have decided to solve it. We might need your help, but let's see how to do. One size doesn't fit to all, but the certain principles, after all, are very important. So the traditions are not made by the God. The God might have a certain opinions, but traditions are made by people. And it's our duty and right to decide whether we continue traditions, not only good traditions or the bad, negative traditions. It's our right also to think whether we would like to be the mothers and fathers of the new tradition. And I think this is the question we can also speak today. I could have a lot of examples about the sustainability panel, and I will come back in the discussion, but I think that you very well already took both the climate change, you took on many other issues, and so I thought more to tell about the way how we feel. Then I have a question. Everybody spoke already the negotiations, and so we can speak about this report also, but now my question is, Will Rio+20 advance gender equality? Yes or no?
That's the toughest question so far.
Yes. Yeah, you can be as honest as you want, but don't try to be as pessimistic as you are. Okay, but let's see how what you mean.
Let's see the result.
Okay, I almost expected that you will do it that way. Now take these numbers, write these numbers down. You remember what I told about our report, how it was a newly born baby. So it can be so that even afterwards you don't consider that Rio+20 was a pretty baby, but let's see now that after Rio, how do you feel then? Remembering that whether you said yes or no. And during the discussion, we try to think that how we could change the numbers, and perhaps we could take the question again in the end of the panel. Fine.
Thank you very much for that very interesting input from a woman with so much experience. Annika, you come from a small island, approximately 50,000 people. Surely you must have reached some type of gender equality.
Yes. Well, first of all, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to be a part of such a distinguished gathering for this important event. I would like to thank my Norwegian colleagues and the Nordic Council of Ministers for the opportunity. My perspective will be a little more local. We have already spoken about gender equality in a global perspective. So now I will take you up north to a small island called Faroe Islands in the north between Iceland and Norway, somewhere between there. The link between gender equality and sustainable development is actually the most important issue for the future of my small island nation in the North Atlantic, the Faroe Islands, with a population of just under 50,000. Like other Nordic countries, we have a welfare system that provides us with a high standard of health, social services, and education. And we have equal opportunities for men and women firmly written into our laws. But despite this, gender imbalances exist today in the Faroe Islands. One thing is to have empowerment of women written into laws and conventions. Another much more difficult thing is to change attitudes and cultural structures in society. One example of this is very small percentage of women in Faroese politics. We have been very slow to catch up with our Nordic neighbors. In recent years, the government has had a campaign to help raise consciousness and address this imbalance. And these efforts have helped. After the last national election in October last year, nearly a third of members of parliaments in the Faroese parliament today are women. But in the government, I am only woman minister in a cabinet of 8 ministers. However, the real concern for the future sustainability of our nation is the striking level of outmigration of women from the Faroe Islands in recent years. This has left our small population with a large deficit of younger, well-educated women who can and should be contributing to economic growth in the Faroe Islands. This is a very dangerous trend and we need to reserve it, but the question is how. To find solution, we also need to understand the causes. A certain level of outmigration from the Faroes has long been a fact of life. I'm sure this is true of most island peoples. Most young Faroese people who want a higher education have to go outside the country to get it, and some of these decide to establish a life and career elsewhere. But why is the real brain drain today so clearly among young women? I believe it has a lot to do with the fact that our society and economy is so highly dependent on fisheries. This sector is a primary industry focused on capture and production of marine resources. It is a male-dominated sector, still very much grounded in a traditional hunting mentality. This is not a sector that has managed to create jobs that appeal to women in a modern welfare society. The fisheries sector needs to apply the concept of green economy to its own strategies for future development. And it needs to understand the enormous potential of women to contribute to creative solutions for economic development. The Faroe Islands will continue to be a nation dependent on the sea and sustainable fisheries in the future. But without the meaningful contribution of women to the future development of our economy and our major industries, I believe the sustainability of our entire society is a risk. So that was a few topics from the Faroe Islands.
Thank you very much. Let's also hear a Swedish perspective, Anita.
Thank you. And first of all, I must say that it's so interesting to listen to both sisters here and to see both the progress but also the problems we have to deal with and we have to face. In gender equality, the Nordic countries are doing relatively well. We can say the same about sustainable development, and I think that is not a coincidence. I'm a little bit proud that Sarah Cook highlighted the Nordic model. And I also think that it's no coincidence that the foundation for the Rio process that started in 1992 was created by a commission chaired by a Nordic woman, Gro Harlem Brundtland. But I'm also convinced that we still have a long way to go on the sustainable development journey. In my country, Sweden, in the Nordic region, but also globally. Therefore, women have to play a more important role in the politics, in the business, in the civil society, and in all decision making. Speakers today have reminded us about that women perform 2/3 of the world's work, but earn as little as 10% of the world's income. I will also remind you about that the women only have 1% of the world's property. And we know that they have a heavy burden of unpaid work in the household are mostly laid on women. Let me also remind you that women entrepreneurs are not fully visible in the statistic. They are not being registered as manager, particularly not in the green sector. ILO today have remind us about the hard work they do and the important work to lift and to create new jobs, both new jobs and also to save the possibility to save the planet. I think we have to set more focus on women's entrepreneurship, especially in the green sector, where I think gender equality is prerequisite for sustainable development. I would like to mention an idea that we are using in Sweden just now to inspire women to start up their own business. We have nominated 300 voluntary ambassadors that take direct contact with women and inspire them to develop their own business. My final point is that I think that the gender perspective was lacking in Agenda 21, adopted in Rio 1992. I would like to see it clearly formulated in the outcome of Rio+20. That gender equality is necessary if we have and if we can solve the environmental challenge and pursue sustainable development. I do hope that the recognition, the importance of gender equality will be included in the document that hopefully will be adopted on Friday here in Rio. It's important to say it loud and clear that without gender equality, there will be no sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the panel so far. Let me just pose one question to you. More of a sort of paradigmatic type, because we are talking all the time about green growth. What we're talking about is growth, growth, growth. To a certain extent, I thought, to provoke you a little bit, that women were more into a different type of value system than only growth. Isn't green growth then only the same thing but with a new name?
It can be a bit. It might be so that this green growth can be a small amount more feminine side, but I come to one of the conclusions of the panel's report. We have 56 recommendations, and whatever you think after the Rio, so anyway, read the recommendations. You will find them also in internet, so you don't need to carry the papers. And so we thought that for people, for us, it's important to make the things visible in a way. If you cannot measure it, it doesn't exist. Every housewife, her father knows it at home. But if you count what you do, it has to be counted. And what we have accounted so far, it has been the economic growth, GDP. And then when you ask from Costa Rica, or you ask in Bhutan, or you ask in USA, or you ask in France, that how much is your economic growth? What's your GDP? So they are different numbers. But then when you ask that, what's the happiness of your people? So it's very interesting to see that, for instance, between the Costa Rica and USA, anybody from Costa Rica, they have about a third less GDP than in USA, but at the happiness they are better. And it's not that they are modest and they can easily live less. It's a question that there are other things which also matters. And then we have asked the economists to say that how you will measure the welfare of the people on this planet. And then comes the question of this modern trinity, that economic growth has to contain the social justice and it has to respect the planetary boundaries. Otherwise, it's not welfare, not for the people, not for the planet. And then when you say that, what's about the green growth? So I think that the growth as such will be measured also in different way. But it doesn't mean that we will try to hide the importance of economics, but to put it, to stop its tyranny, to put it to govern with two other aspects. But then, of course, the issue what we could come later on is that how much it will get also jobs and what kind of difficulties or challenges we will have there.
Good.
That's it.
Good. You mentioned Costa Rica. I read at the Global Happiness Index project that they are #1.
And Bhutan is also, but
Bhutan is high up on the list.
I don't know which is the best, but anyway, they are the good ones.
Yeah. And the United States was actually 124.
Yeah.
Ladies, any views on this about green growth? And
Yes, please.
Anita?
For me, green growth is sustainable growth. And the green sector, the green economy, and that also included ecosystem, that we have to have another account in the future. And now they are hard working to find out good mathematical, good system for this. And we also have to include new sectors and see what the green economy can be in the energy sector for sustainable and new energy system, recycling, and yesterday evening we talked about food and the importance to grow in a sustainable way. So that's...
Annika?
Yeah, I cannot imagine our social and cultural structure as a fishing nation will change dramatically. Therefore, we need to diversify our workforce and get more women interested in working in all levels of the fishery sector. Also, when we are speaking about green growth, and high technology, green high technology. For this, we also need to attitude change among women. We also have to use all human resources and create solutions that enable as many people as possible to contribute to our common welfare. So I think it's very important.
May I add also that when we count even the economic growth, so we have noticed that the way how we count it might be a little bit modernized. We should also take the question of the pricing. When we go to the shop and we see the price of the product, so we think that everything is what's the cost what has been in order to produce this is there, and plus a profit. But it's not true. It's not true. It can be also so that there are externalities. There are externalities which might come, for instance, with the subsidized when it's subsidized by the state or some other actors, or it can be also in such a way that it doesn't tell the real price in other ways. And now the question of the environmental externalities have come quite much already into discussion. That we know that the minerals have not always the right price, we know that energy has not always the right price, as I said, but there can be also such kind of questions like the fresh water or the fresh air, and now the taxation systems concerning the pollution of the air has been one of the first efforts to do that. But when we are now here, I think that would underline also the social externalities, the negative things, but it can be also the plus things, that if you create a service which have further effects like education has, so it might mean also that the price is smaller than it will be the food costs. I'm very optimistic that quite soon we are in the time when this kind of the new pricing and some other indicators than GDP will be also the part of the mainstreaming in economics. It seemed to be quite close already that in different organizations, UNDP and many NGOs indexes, they are more or less accepted by a majority of the economists. And that will mean very much about the question of you saying that what's the green growth.
Very good. I think this warrants maybe a power vote question again, doesn't it?
Well, thank you very much for very interesting speakers. The thing is, we've talked a lot about adaptation, how we react to, for instance, climate changes and how we react to what happens to us. But let's also maybe just quickly reflect on mitigation. So, could you, yeah. So, do women and men affect the environment differently? Do they actually have different CO2 footprints? Yes. Have you should have some.
No.
Okay. Right.
That will be you going.
Right. It seems like everybody's voted. Can we get the results, please? Yeah. So the majority do believe that we have different CO2 footprints. And we know that technology, innovation, all these issues, production, they're extremely important factors when we talk about sustainable development and gender equality. But the thing is, we have to have the other leg on it. We have to have behavior. I mean, if we actually want to do something about, for instance, climate change, we do have to realize that we are dealing with people. And this clearly proves which is that the right answer is yes, we do act differently, which means that this way we have to include this gender dimension. If we want to make people react differently, change their consumption, we have to include the fact that women and men behave differently. And what do you think about that? And also, if anybody else after the panel have any ideas on this, please come forward.
So of course the footprints in the north and south are different. Very often we say that It's a double question that the population growth is very much coming from the south, and the request to change the consumption model coming to the north. But it's not so clear. There are poor and there are the rich both in the south and in the north. But of course in the south it's more structural. And to be poor doesn't mean that you have a green behavior always. You have no choice to do that. And in that way, I think that there should be also the background of the men and women. But what I think that is underestimated in discussions, and I know that some of you have tried to be very active in that to make a reform, is that the women of the world consume the most of the everyday products in the world. So in the matter of fact, the women have also the CO2 in their shopping bags. But it's a question also that in which way they do it. Of course the men might buy sometimes a car and the women might have an influence on that. But I mean that everybody needs a food, and how the food has produced and in which way it can be done is very much a choice of the women. And what I know from my own experience in my own country and also in some development cooperation is that women are quite flexible to change their consumption models if they get the good facts, and if they have a financial possibilities, as it would be said in fine way, if they have money to do these choices. It would be also interesting to see that young and old, because the young ones are very, very active in the green future, but how they consume is not always so clear.
Before giving the word to Annika, I'll just mention two facts. The fact is we talk food is also an issue, and men eat 139 grams of meat per day, and women eat 81. Also, as you said, it's actually proven by studies that women are more likely to change their habits if they think that would support sustainable development. Please, Annika.
Yes, I think that this question is very good. It shows us how important gender equality is. I think that women used to care more about the environment than men. Maybe I'm generalizing, but I think it's so. And men is more care about the economy. I used to be a minister for the environment, and we make our environment policy and climate policy, and that was the same experience that I got, that women are more care about the environment and men about the economy. But that can combine, you can combine it, and then you get a win-win situation, and you can get a really good climate policy, because it can combine, and it's necessary both to have the economic perspective and the environmental perspective. So it is a win-win situation, and that's why it's very important to speaking about gender equality in that issue too.
All start with knowledge, and also to be aware of this situation. I think that's so important. But also good example that a lot of men tell their friends, and to make it popular, to be aware of the situation and to take steps. And also, all women also have power. Don't forget that. We have the power in our homes. We have the power meeting our children. We have the power also by shopping and by giving information and good example. So we can't not always say that the fault is here. We have also responsibility to make this chance, and now we are working hard with this.
Well, the fact is that you know, we're seeing that we have different behaviors. Actually, I would like to take one more power vote. And the question is: the energy and transport sector are responsible for much of the CO2 emission. Are women and men equally represented in decision making in this area? Because you were just mentioning, all of you were just mentioning, yeah, women, they are thinking green and sustainable development with a human face and all this. So, what do you think? Take a different one. You voted already. Okay, seems like everybody's ready. So let's get the result. Well, I must admit 83% are quite right. The funny thing is, if you look at, for instance, the transport sector, women are the users of public transportation.
You don't need any scientific study for that. Just go on Monday morning in every Nordic city with metro, and you see that whether you have there men and women equally.
But are they also equally represented in the decision making? Actually forming the public transportation net? No, they're not. And we know that it's extremely important for the security issue, but also for the planning. I mean, the public transport needs, when it's women taking it, and they're also responsible for the children often, and shopping. So they need to form these lines accordingly to the wishes of the users. But there are no women. And again, during the Danish EU presidency, we do have a very large report which covers this area, so you get all the statistics and examples of that. If you have any responses, otherwise we have a question from down here. No? You were?
Not so much a question.
A remark, yeah? Please.
Well, it's okay. Well, the answer must obviously be no, since women are not represented in politics as much as men. So a lot of these questions, I think, take its context in a Western industrialized community where things are a bit different than many other places around the world. And again, when we're talking about consumerism, again, I have to make a context to my own experience in Greenland, which is not a Western community and not industrialized in the same manner, and we don't have farms, and men fish, and we eat a lot of fish, and men eat a lot of fish. So I think when you talk about the problems in this, within the gender equality area, then we have to be context-based, as one said in the beginning, and we have to address that one size does not fit all, and the road to obtain our goals can be different. So just so we don't end up in the same thinking.
Comment to that?
Yeah, so the comment is that of course that the one size doesn't fit to everyone. But for instance, even in the Western countries where women then are very much the consumers of the public transportation, so and they are very much represented in politics. So it's a good example that still the women are not in this decision making. So it means that you have the further steps in that way. That those who don't use the public transport, they are deciding which kind of the public transport will be offered. If we take another example from the south, for instance, I know very well that how big importance was in certain countries that the women got the mobile telephones. Of course, it was important also for the men, but when the women were those traders mainly, when they have the mobile telephone, they could know that which markets were available and where, and when they could use the food. So it was much easier to go to the right place to get a good price. So in that way, sometimes, how could I say, it's good to compare that you have such kind of circumstances where, by the way, the Greenland is a fantastic place to visit. So you have a different circumstances, and so we have in Nordic countries, it has in Western countries, of course, but then it's good to see, for instance, for those who are not from Europe, that it doesn't help only that you will get the representation in the political decision making if you are even there in the sectoral way, that all the women are sitting and looking after the daycare, what is important, or healthcare, but they are not in transport, what should be also important. And vice versa, it's important that the men are looking after the preschool education or healthcare, and not only thinking that they are typical for the roads and machines. So be radical in both ways. Okay.
Short comment from the two other panelists, so we're running out of time.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting. Greenland, you have highlighted a different point of view to see in another way. I think that's good for us to hear, because it's not black and white. We have to have a dialogue with each other. And it's so important. This say us how important it is that both women and men shall share the decision making. It's interesting now to see if there will be a difference in Sweden, because now we have a female that is transport minister. We haven't seen the result yet, but it will be very interesting to follow it if we can see a change in that behavior.
Very good. Annika?
Yes, very short remark. I think that the capital of Faroe Island, Tórshavn, is the only capital in the world where the public transport is free of use. And it was the women in the city council who made that decision. So,
bravo, bravo. Gentleman down there.
Thank you. On gender equality, I'm Helge Sem, I'm from the Nordic Development Fund. We work with projects in developing countries. My question relates to gender equality. So the thing is that the Nordic countries, in a sense, is an enclave. We've come very far on gender equality. You don't have to go very far away until you see that the situation is very different. If you go 30 years back, when environmental sustainability was the big issue, that also met with a lot of resistance. And you can look at how far we come on environment today. I mean, we made great achievements, and in these institutions we work with, I mean, it's mainstreamed all over. Mm-hmm. If you look at gender or women in development, as it was called in the 80s, I mean, we haven't made much progress at all. And I guess we may all have our ideas about why that hadn't happened. But gender issues have not been mainstreamed into development projects at all. And I would like to have your comments on how do you think you could make a contribution to make that happen? I don't see that happen in the multilateral organizations or the bilateral organizations. And even though it may not be politically incorrect to say it, I don't think the Nordic organizations have mainstream gender issues and then their development projects either.
Okay, that's a large topic.
But no, it's very small. How can you, as political leaders, help us move this in the right direction, so that we don't end up here 20 years down the road and we're still in the same place?
Let's start with Annika. How can you, as a politician, help mainstreaming?
I think that we have to change attitude. I think that we have to change the way of thinking, because we have all the framework is all right. All women rights are written in the framework. So I think that we have to inform. We stakeholders have to inform to people how important it is to have a really gender equality, because we have all the rights. But if we take women in politics, we got the opportunity to go to election for 100 years ago. 1915, women could go to the national election. But still, 100 years later, in the Faroe Islands, in the parliament where we have 33 members of parliament, we only have 10 women. So I think we have to change attitude, and we have to change the way of thinking, and we have to inform of the importance of gender equality.
Anita?
I feel that something has happened. I can see the new generation. Nowadays, it's so naturally that both the fathers and the mothers care about and want to take responsibility for the homes. It's more frequently. But I also see that it's important that we have different tables to sit around. It can be in the Nordic Council, it can be in the Parliament, it can be in NGOs, and it can be EU, for example, and also globally. So for me, I can see that we take important steps forward. But I can be frustrated when I feel that it's too slow. So therefore, I really hope to say once again, I really hope that the solution for the Rio+20 will take a better and bigger step forward.
Tarja?
I think that one of the main issues is, of course, how to change the mindset, how we see the world. But there are, of course, different ways to do that. If I take first one example from my own country, and then to come to UN, I was the 11th president of my country, and we didn't speak about that during the elections 2000. That is it important that the woman could be a president. But after I became a president, so the little girls all around my country, they wrote the letters to me, yippee, I want to become a president too. And the children were much more fair on that, they thought. And then everybody almost in the Nordic countries knows about how the story ends, that a little boy wrote also to me and said, is it true what the girls said at school, that the boys cannot become any more president? So it happened so quickly. But then I take a third step and I say, it's much easier to move the power from one to another than to share it. Of course, when it's a question of the president, you cannot share it, but now we have again a man president, because the Constitution says that only 2 terms are allowed, and I have done those. It could be interesting to try again, but still, it's good that it's not possible. So it's the best. I said it already enough, but I think it was a good protection of the human being also. It's not possible. But then, if I think that how many of these recommendations what we have here, how much they will demand, request the different set mind. So I think that at least we have now succeeded to get such kind of the Secretary General for UN, who has appointed many women around him. You cannot choose you cannot choose your gender, but you can choose the gender equality. And now in this report there is a lot of such kind of recommendations which are directly for the women and empowerment of the women. And all wise men know that of course they lose something about their priority status, but they will win much more with that. And this, what they will win, is the sustainable development. So whatever is the result of the negotiations of the Rio, so use the recommendations. It's not illegal to use them if the Rio is not good enough with the negotiations. I believe that the time has come. The business knows it, NGOs knows it, people knows it, and in the democratic world, sooner or later, those we elect will know it.
Excellent. Well, before entering the last session of today, I will pose the last power vote question, which is a very good follow-up of what you were exactly talking about. The thing is, a very rather famous Danish environmentalist, Bjørn Lomborg, he once made a gathering saying, if we only have so much we can work for, what should be the most important? So, we would like to ask you that question. Which issue do you think is most important to include in UN documents regarding women's empowerment? So, please vote. And you still don't want to vote? Yeah? No.
They're all important.
And we'll let this stay a little bit longer because it's rather difficult.
How many you can put?
You can only put one. Just one? That's a problem. That's a problem, yeah. Do you want one?
Oh, yeah. I did know that you are so hard for these people.
Yeah, please, you have to include it.
Yes.
I made it and I don't even know what to vote for. Right. Everybody finished?
Yep.
Then we'd like the result, please. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yes.
Good. That is one of the reasons why it might be so difficult here at Rio to know exactly what to push for. This is, I'm also a member of the delegation, and we always find it extremely difficult what to prioritize, because I bet that all of you agree that we've talked about all these issues today. All of them are almost equally important, but if you can only, choose one, what do you choose? So on... so did I. No, anyway, so leaving this, we would like to thank the panelists.
And in order just to pull the day together, we have asked two young representatives, one from Norway, one from Brazil, to come with their concluding remarks based on what they've heard today. We have Signhild Stave Samuelsen, which is from the Norwegian Children and Youth Council, and we have João Victor Pinto Dutra, which is a youth representative for Promundo Brazil. And it's nice to have one of the Brazilians here, as Brazil is hosting this important event. So if you could just take a seat up there, and yes? Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Bara sätta här också. Ja. Yeah, Signhild. So what would your comments be?
Yeah. I should probably start by saying that I'm not here as a representative of the Norwegian Youth Council, but on behalf of the Nordic Children and Youth Committee, and I will speak a little bit more about that later. All the Nordic countries have gender equality as an aim, and therefore the discussions in the Nordic countries when it comes to equality usually operate with a broader definition of equality. It's not only gender, but a lot more. And I will also use this broader definition in my comments to what has been going on. As Andrew just said, my name is Signhild Stave Samuelsen, and I'm the Vice Chairman of the Nordic Children and Youth Committee, usually referred to as NORBUK. And NORBUK is the Nordic Council of Ministers advisory and coordinating organ for the Nordic and international cooperation on issues affecting the youth and the young. And since we're a cooperating organ, we have decided to have a structure where officials from all the 5 countries and the 3 autonomous areas meet youth representatives, as myself, and to work together because we believe that participation is a core value in developing a better and common future. And when the report, Our Common Future, was launched 20 years ago, it pointed out that sustainable future meant economic development, social justice, and environmental maintenance. And in all the 5 Nordic countries, an important political aim is combining these 3 factors. Economic development is the goal, but an important tool to help us reaching it is a welfare system that provides a somewhat equal distribution of social goods. Equality on the basis of gender, and regardless of religious, ethnical, social, sexual, and economic positions, are of course important for reaching the goal. The Nordic democracies are often regarded as an open process. In order for our democracies to be open, we need to remove the obstacles that hinder groups of people from participation. And for the NORBUK, the question of equality does also include age. The Nordic model includes the belief that the work for inclusion starts at an early age. Our 5 countries all score high on the indexes of young people's democratic attitudes. And this is not only because we learn it in school and it is a core value in the school system, but it's also because the voices of the youth are given the floor in the societies in general. The civil societies are strong in all our countries, and the works of the NGOs are highly appreciated. And their work is important in the struggle towards sustainability because they provide a platform where children and youth may form their own spare time activities and where their opinion matters. By providing a platform for participation, they provide help in keeping our democracies alive, and they contribute to renewing them over and over. Many of the youth organizations from the Nordic countries are present here at the Rio+20 summit, and they're, for instance, meeting the summit with a demand for an ombudsman for future generations. Others with a request of new and binding environmental agreements. And regardless of how one meets these two suggestions, the negotiations would definitely be filled with a lot more engagement and new perspectives because of people who manage to think further than not only our generations. The Nordic countries are not perfect, and we have challenges also in our path towards a sustainable future. And since the main focus on the discussion that has been going on here has been gender equality, I would like to share an example of an obvious challenge we have. In 2011, the Norwegian Social Research launched an analysis based upon a survey that had been done a couple of years before. And among one of the most interesting findings of this survey was the fact that approximately 50% of all the boys in the Nordic countries believe that men are better leaders than women. And what is interesting with this is that all of them were born long after Vigdis Finnbogadottir made it the world's first female president, and long after the milestone of Gro Harlem Brundtland's women government. And I'm very sorry to say that this also includes Finland, where they actually at the time had a female president. But with a model that is aiming to find a social justice for the members of state and that values the work of the civil society, the Nordic countries have found a way that we believe is sustainable, especially because it asks for all members equal participation. And from our side, as the Nordic Children and Youth Committee, we are one of the biggest providers of financial support for pan-Nordic organizations. And we are doing so because it is one way of empowering the biggest fund our society has ever had and ever will have the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. João, a Brazilian perspective, youth perspective.
Good morning for all. I represent Instituto Pro Mundo. That is an NGO, a Brazilian NGO, that seeks the gender equity and promotes the eradication of the violence against women, against children. And it is to speak about the Brazilian experience is good because, for example, since the president, Dilma Rousseff, president, since she was elected, for example, the gender agenda was not going on, or was not keeping as it was. So it is interesting to see how the gender is incorporated in all the discussions about sustainability, about society, about economic, because as Pro Mundo sees, men are have to be involved in the gender discussion, because both men and the women are involved, are constrained by an accident. So both men and women are involved are constrained by this hegemonic masculinity that operates in the majority of societies. I speak about, for example, for me, to be a man, I have to be serious. I have to have a behavior serious, to be imposing my proper body had to be shaped by this masculinity. And so Promundo works in this situation. We work both with men and women, but we believe that men too also have the participation to building this gender equity. So it's interesting to when we speak about sustainability and gender, because both of them are transversal in our society. They have implications in economic, in politics, in tradition, religion. So we have to think about which are the roots that make we think what is sustainability, what is development, because the science, our world vision is still shaped by this sense of what is masculinity, what is femininity. So I think we have to act together, we act in the sense to promote men and promote women in a gender equity properly. Because if, for example, we have many cases with women that we work, and she goes. We have projects, we have workshops, and when we discuss gender equity, violence against women, and sometimes the women comes back to home, and her husband hits her, or is more and more violent than he was, because she is trying to be more empowered. So we have to integrate the men and the women in this sense to think about what is gender and so what is sustainability. I think it will be richer, the debate, the discussion, and the products, the outcomes after would be richer and successful, of course, when we think in this sense. So, thank you.
Okay. We are approaching the end, and Kira, there's a song, a Danish song, which says, "Dear little boy of mine, what did you learn in school today?" etc., etc. Dear woman of mine, what did you learn at the seminar today?
Well, I don't know if it's just me, but I can smell the food from next door, so I'll do it a little bit short. But I've been scribbling down all the things that I've learned today, and of course, we all agreed, even within the first question, that gender equality and welfare is fundamental for the achievement of sustainable development. And we have to go walk on two legs. We have to have all the technical stuff, all the innovation, the production, all the green technologies and energy solutions. They have to be combined with social inclusion. We need to have sustainable development with a human face. And human face, what do I mean by that? Well, like we talked about earlier, it's also about behaviors. It's about relations. And women and men are very different. And even though that's also good and wonderful, we have to agree that we have to tackle women and men differently as well as not differently. We have to allow them the same possibilities. We also have learned by all these different speakers that gender equality and sustainable development, as I said in the beginning, is very broad area. And sustainable development, we must realize that it is broad and we have to prioritize like we did at the end. Gender equality is not only about justice for women, it's also about economy, again, walking on both legs. We must include women. We've talked about the importance of both looking at men and women, but since we've also established the fact that The poorest of the world's population is mainly women, and they're more affected by, for instance, climate change. We must include these women, not only for their sake, but like we said, also for the sake of the world, because they're very talented. They have got many competences that we need. It must become a win-win situation. I will finish in a moment. I've scribbled a bit more. Because, as we heard before, the more equal as a society, the more prosperous and actually happy, which is also a very important point that we can take from here. So, concretely, what have we learned? Well, gender equality increases economic growth, it increases innovation, it increases sustainable societies and social inclusion. And how do we then increase gender equality itself? Well, we need to all agree that we have to focus on human rights. That's the first step of all. Human rights. And then we've heard that we need to have national welfare systems also. I think that's an important thing we can take from here. We need free or affordable education for both girls and boys. We've heard that there are challenges in different areas of the world. In the south, girls don't get any education. In the north, we're actually seeing the opposite. We heard from Greenland. But we also know that in, for instance, Denmark, every fourth boy do not get an education. So they could get it, but they're not. But we need to realize why, because otherwise we will lose out on their competences as well. We need affordable, accessible daycare, because we need to ensure women's possibility of participating in the labour market. We need social protection. We need to take care of vulnerable women and their children, not least, as we've heard, if there's violence. We need health services. It was mentioned only briefly, but I think very importantly, we need to protect women and we need to ensure that they can be healthy, because healthy women can be wealthy women and they must control their own body. So we need sexual and reproductive health and rights for all women around the world. Lastly, we need access to political decision making, because again we need everybody's competences, both women and men around the world.
Lovely. I know that it has been a long morning, and I see a lot of pensive and deeply concentrated faces. And someone told me once that if you see people in deep concentration, they're either thinking about sex or food. I gather you are thinking about food. And lunch is just around the corner, physically just around the corner. And we live in a way in what Charles Dickens once labeled as a world of two cities. We have the economic forums of the Davos, we have the social forums of Dakar and in Brazil, and those are two very different worlds. In a way, the Rio+20 process is bringing these two worlds together. And I think that the gender question is both an end in itself, but it also is a way forward on all of these difficult issues. So on behalf of the Nordic Council of Ministers, Kyra and myself, I'd like to thank you for your patience and have a good lunch. Thank you.
Let me just briefly mention that the food is an example of new Nordic food made by Nordic women and Brazilian women. So please enjoy.